Breaking It Down with Frank MacKay. This is 103.9 LI News Radio.
I'd like to welcome everyone to Breaking It Down. Frank MacKay here, but much more importantly, legendary pianist and keyboard player Patrick Moraz is our very special guest. Patrick, how are you?
I'm very well, very well. Thank you, especially now that I know where you are located, like in Long Island, and it must be pretty cold up there.
Yeah.
Whereas here in Florida, the weather is absolutely fantastic and phenomenal. I just happen to be in my studio, like I am every day, every afternoon, and every night, all night, to prepare for the upcoming events, which I'm going to be taking part in.
Well, a lot of our listeners are in Florida. And you're talking to folks, Patrick, in West Palm Beach and Gainesville area as well on different stations down there, and they're thrilled to have you. I think most people know your work from Yes and Moody Blues, but so much work over the years. You like to keep busy, do you not?
Oh yes, all the time. Yeah. I've got many more. Tens of hundreds of compositions which have never seen the ear of the day or the light of day. But I'm working on always on different parallel projects and so on. But I'm playing every day, at least 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 hours a day, either on my grand piano or on keyboards, and I'm always composing and preparing some stuff, arranging and so on, and of course listening to also a lot of music, which I'm passionate about.
Yeah, of course. What type of studio do you have? Do you have a Pro Tools setup or a Cubase?
Well, I have. First and foremost, I'm very, very fortunate to have a very large facility, which is about between 3,000 and 4,000 square feet, and I have about 30 keyboards in there. I've got a concert grand piano. I've got the whole setup with the screens, the Apple computers and big screens and so on. And I'm using mainly Logic to record, although I've been associated with of course, because Opcode. I used to love Opcode at the time in the 90s, in the late 90s and so on. But before that, I've used Digital Performer, I've used the Cubase and even Reaper at the time. But for me, Logic is probably one of the most, with the other ones I just mentioned, sophisticated, And I also use Sibelius, and I'm just about to use now a new program for writing the music exactly right, like they have in the publishers' books and so on, which is called Dorico. And that's the newest program, which is actually the extension of Sibelius. Is probably not the same company, but I've heard and I've seen demonstration of Dorico, which was absolutely stunning.
Listen, I've mentioned Yes and the Moody Blues simply because the pop world knows your work from those two great bands so much, but you've done so much film composing over the years. Do you have a track or do you keep track of how many films you've actually written for?
Well, you're talking about all together, or just for movies, or just for?
Well,
I've got everything which has been kind of released and published and so on, and even under my own kind of publishing names and whatever. I must have at least more than 500 pieces, more, or maybe 600 or something like that. But I've written, I know during the past many years I've been composing, I've written probably more than 3,000 pieces of music, But the thing is, you see, there's not always the possibility of releasing everything. And then sometimes I find myself listening to a piece that I completely forgot about. And I'm finding myself reworking on it or extending it. Or, once I started, for example, a whole ballet. I've got several ballet and cantatas that nobody really knows about yet, but they are going to see the light of day. I can promise you that.
Yeah. Well, listen, let me remind folks that are just turning on their radios or just tuning in to us. Frank MacKay here with pianist, absolute legend in the world of composing, and his work on keyboards and piano from Yes and Moody Blues. The Moody Blues and Yes are the more recognizable sources that people know his work from. But so much work. You just mentioned 3,000 compositions. Just an unbelievable amount of work, a body of work, second to none. It's tremendous. Have you played anything but piano lately? I know when you were younger, you started out on violin, and you started out with different instruments. Do you play anything other than piano now?
Oh yeah, I mean, I play. Well, for example, I'm still playing some wind instruments, which I started, of course, with a bugle at the time when I was actually I was probably 8 or 9, and then I switched to harmony horn, hunting horn, alpine horn, and the trumpet, of course, because at the time my absolute idol, there were two, but one of the main ones, of course, was Miles Davis, and I always, when I was in my teens, I always wanted to play like Miles Davis, and but I've played also all kinds of the percussion instruments, like vibraphone and marimba phones, and I love to play percussion, whether acoustic or electronic, and I have also all kinds of some array of course, ethnic instruments like flutes and panpipe flutes, and I used to play also the flutes, and I played also some trombone, and I played the alto saxophone. No, not the alto, sorry, a soprano saxophone. I don't play those anymore, but of course I'm familiar with the sound and their frequencies and their range. And violin, I wouldn't even. I could just about dare play a couple of scale and a couple of licks on violin, but I was no violinist. When you hear all these violinists, from David Oistrakh to Yehudi Menuhin to Heifetz and to all these and the young people now and so on. It's absolutely staggering and unbelievable. There's such the new generations of players now are blowing our minds, and it's fantastic. It's fantastic.
You mentioned Miles Davis, and he was a favorite of mine as well. What album was it of Miles Davis that stood out? Did you like Bitches Brew, Miles Smiles? What was was it some of the earlier stuff?
Kind of Blue, and the albums he did with John Coltrane in the 50s, and of course after that all the classics like all these kind of things, and but I loved when he switched from playing a lot of notes to very, very few chosen notes, of course, in his own inspiration, and when he started to use the mutes, and that specific sound to me was really aggregated and personalized by Miles Davis, and of course a lot of people copied in. I mean, were influenced by him and so on. But another trumpet player I used to absolutely adore was Clifford Brown. I'm talking about a lot of very, very influential players there. However old they are now, or they were, or they have passed away, But I was also very, to talk about even pianists, I was very close to Bud Powell when he was playing in Geneva. Up to 2 years before he passed and so on. He was playing in clubs. I used to even replace him for the third set, because sometimes he was a little bit, completely out of it. He was tired and whatever. And I was always kind of lurking around, even in my mid-teens, to see if I could sit in for his third set when the people were starting to leave and so on, But and people like that, I've always been very close to people like John Lewis from the Modern Jazz Quartet, Stefan Grappelli, who gave me several masterclass lessons, because I had won several times some jazz festivals in Switzerland and in Europe, and some of the awards were to have these masterclasses with those maestros, And I knew Oscar Peterson as well, and all these people were absolutely my ultimate favorites, And I mean, I was very close to also, still am, as a very, very good friend, although we don't see each other maybe only every 15 years or whatever, but it's Chick Corea and Herbie, man, very good friends, and we are still meeting somehow. Either at the NAMM show or Los Angeles. I went to see the 75 anniversary, one of the 15 double concerts that Chick Corea and his band gave at the Catalina Bar and Grill the other day, about 3 months ago, and they all received me with open arms and so on. It was fantastic, really, really. It's great to really be still very acquainted with all this community, with these jazz leaders,
Let me remind folks once again of who they're listening to. Patrick Moraz, the great Patrick Moraz, is a legendary keyboardist and piano player, composer, and his work from the band Yes and the Moody Blues. Frank MacKay here, thrilled to have Patrick Moraz. It all started out in Switzerland for you. You were born and raised in Switzerland?
Yes, I was born and raised in Switzerland, and it's only when I started to be, I traveled quite early, but I never chose until the age of 20 to learn English per se, because I had chosen to learn Greek and Latin instead of English. But I used to speak, and I still do. I speak Italian, and of course my first language is French, and my second language is of course German and Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, because I used to live in Brazil for 5 years, and I speak fluent Portuguese as well. And I went into learning English, and I had my proficiency of English at the Cambridge University with a very, very hard kind of job I had as an au pair cook in the south of England at the time, because I couldn't find a job. At the time, the restrictions between countries like the United Kingdom and Switzerland and even France and so on, it was not like now. Not Switzerland. Switzerland is still totally outside virtually outside the European community. But to get me as a Swiss citizen, to get a work permit in England, I would have never had one as a musician anyway in the first place. So I chose to become a cook, an au pair cook. And that's how I learned English, and I in less than a year, less than 2 semesters, I had my proficiency of English.
Wow. It's interesting that you didn't choose to learn English right away. Did you think that your future in the business wasn't through either America or through the UK?
No, I tell you what, at first, when I was like in my early teens even, I wanted to become either an archaeologist or an anthropologist. And for that, I needed to know Greek and Latin because of the etymology of words and all the research and so on. And I was also interested in other, what we would call now, of course, dead languages like Sanskrit and also, all kinds of languages which are even hieroglyphics. That was crazy, man, And I thought, English is such a universal language because everybody can speak it, even if they have a different accent. It's kind of easier than the other European languages, or Indo-European languages like German or even Dutch, or even all these kind of even Yiddish or Arabic languages and so on, and Italian and French. French is such a beautiful, beautiful language, but it's very, very complex compared to English, And I thought, well, if I go and learn English, I'm going to go in the country and learn it like that on the field itself, as opposed to Hannen. We used to call it Hannen, like Rimash things in school. That in 1 hour you'd learn about 3 or 15 words, words and not even be able to put them together. So I tell you what, man, when I was a cook in an au pair cook, I was making £2.88 a week.
Wow.
£2.88. You know, of course, that was a long time ago. There's been inflation, but I also was able to give lessons to some of these students. I mean, you can even imagine that school was just about like, you know, when you go and see those Harry Potter movies,
yeah,
and you have all these kids and the students and so on, and they learn that. Of course, there they didn't learn magic per se, but they wanted to learn, of course, French and even Latin and Greek. So I was able to kind of double or even triple my little salary giving private lessons. And then I found a way to make even more by offering my services to a church, to a Lutheran church down the Presbyterian. I mean, you know, one of those big churches. They needed an organist, and I proposed to the main priest there is a cardinal actually to play every Sunday, you know, and maybe get a little percentage of the quest, you know, and you know, after 3 weeks, already after 3 weeks, the church was full because I used to play classical music. I used to improvise and put sometimes a little bit of blues and a little bit of that and a little bit of even Bob Dylan at the time, you know.
Yeah.
and improvise on Bach and all these kind of wonderful classical composers. Although I didn't really always follow the things, but I could play the arias and the cantatas and so on, you know. So anyways, it was good. And then I found another job during my off hours to play in pubs. Yeah. And on Saturdays and Sunday afternoons, and I was making £1 per night on that, plus the tips and so on. And so things got better, but eventually I was caught by the
union, right? You were kicked out of the union.
And I was caught by the secretary of the musicians union local, and they threw me out of the country because my work permit was to be an au pair cook and not a pianist or an organist in a church.
Wow.
Can you believe that? You know,
wow.
Oh man, I tell you what, that was so it became so difficult to get back to England and to get back and play music. And I had discovered, of course, some local bands and so on. And don't forget also I'm going to stop talking after that, but I'm going to let you ask the question. But in 1960, I was learning German as an exchange student in the north of Germany, in Flensburg, which was about 150 miles down or up on the border of Denmark and Germany. But it was about 150 miles from Hamburg. And from several times when I was there in the summer of 1960, I was able to come down to Hamburg, hitchhiking either on my own or with people. I had learned German pretty well because I had it in school in Switzerland. And then I that's how I saw the Beatles the first time, man. They blew a fucking mind.
Wow. Well, hey, let me remind folks.
That was absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you could do a movie on your life. Very, very fascinating. It's a success story. It's an incredible success story. And the story we're hearing is Patrick Moraz's story. And, you know, his work from Yes and the Moody Blues and so much more. 3,000 compositions. Film composer, but 3,000 compositions probably all together. It's hard to keep track of something like that.
You know, I love your questions.
Well, listen, I appreciate it, and I love your music, and I think so many people have gotten to hear you through Yes and Moody Blues and the Moody Blues, I'm sure there are plenty of people who haven't heard your film scores. I've heard something you did. Oh well, we'll get into that after the break. But so much of the work that you're not being recognized for is just terrific, and hopefully you're getting that out there. So 100 years from now, so many people could see and hear.
You're too kind, man.
Well, listen, we're coming up on a quick break. Patrick Moraz is our very special guest. If you're in New York And folks listening in Florida, he'll have some dates in Florida, but I think January 17th, he'll be playing solo piano. We'll get back to you with the place. Coming up on a break, Frank MacKay here with Patrick Moraz, legendary pianist and keyboard player. You know his work from Yes and the Moody Blues and so much more. We'll be back right after this.
Breaking It Down with Frank MacKay. This is 1039 LI News Radio.
I'd like to welcome everyone back to Breaking It Down. Frank MacKay here, but more importantly, legendary keyboardist and piano player, musician, composer Patrick Moraz from Yes and the Moody Blues is our very special guest. Born in Switzerland and has had some story getting to where he is now. Over 3,000 compositions along the way, and he works out of a 3,000 square foot, ironically, square foot studio that he has. Hey, Patrick, welcome back.
Hello, welcome back too. You know, really, I was saying to you before, I love your questions because there's such a beautiful interactivity and elasticity in the way you are expressing your questions. You know, that even in a long distance call like that, over the airwaves, and with all the technologies that we are acquainted to and with and we're using, the fact that there is, you know, inflections and the enthusiasm of your questions, it really makes my day, man.
Well, listen, you just keep doing what you're doing. You're still going strong after all these years. Did you ever think life would turn out this way when you were a teen in Switzerland and you were looking at your career ahead? Did you ever think it would take that turn? Do you ever think that you'd be in a couple prog rock bands that were the legendary, and that's the route you would go? Or did you think that you would be heading more towards classical jazz? Where did you think you were headed when you were a teenager?
Well, you see, when I was a kid, I mean, my dad was actually the production manager in all his jobs as well. My dad was the production manager of at the time, who became the highest paid classical pianist in the world. And even after the recession in the United States, Ignacy Paderewski, who was also the prime minister of Poland, in Switzerland, in the very town where I was born, you know, but that was much before I was born. And my dad always wanted me to be a pianist and learn, or to be a musician. So I started with violin. Then he wanted me to be a concert pianist and so on. So I studied a little bit, not much really, because I was in school and so on. And you know, I've read somewhere that I had extensive piano lessons with the, yes, I've had some, but I've had more quality time and master classes than pure piano lessons as such, But when I was like 5, the big band leader of one of the big bands that was playing in one of my dad's things. My dad was managing big community places and restaurants in Switzerland, and we're talking about with 50 waitresses and 3 bars, 5 restaurants, a movie theater and a theater itself, and big band every weekend and so on. The leader of the big band realized that I was hiding under the piano when they were rehearsing. They were rehearsing all this kind of Gershwin stuff and all this, Dixieland and also post-war kind of, music, but American music and all these hits. And then the blues, they were playing the boogie and the blues. And so someday the guy, he said, "Oh, but you're hiding. What do you want? Can I show you something on the piano?" I said, "Oh, yes, sir, yeah." And he started, to show me just very like. Things like that. And then I developed all this technique. He showed me all the rules of the blues. He showed me all the rules of the what we call the Anatole, the AADA construction of a song, whether it's in jazz or in any kind of expressive idiom in pop music and so on. And but I have started also classical music a bit, quite a bit. Then at the age of 13, I broke my right arm, and then I broke 6 weeks later, I broke the 4 fingers of my right hand. And my teachers at the time told me, you'll never play classical music again.
Oh.
And it took 6 months to have a kind of a rehab for my hand and my arm. But then I started to realize that I could express myself. Not only I learned how to play the left hand concerto by Ravel in G, to train my left hand. So I became ambidextrous, and 6 months later, I was totally ambidextrous with my hands. But I had also thought about composing, and I had already started to compose all kinds of things, not only for the left hand, but for the right. And then I found myself, not being accepted into those classical music competitions. But on the other hand, that was a blessing in disguise, because I was more than inclined to listen to Dixieland jazz and modern jazz and contemporary music and the new kind of stuff that has been kind of even more or less rejected at the time, But my idol, and still are my spiritual and historical teachers, at the highest level, they're still Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven. That's my most influential bunch of composers, and so on. And there are more. I can mention tens and tens of other composers, like Schubert, of course, and Schumann and Handel and Ravel and Debussy and even Stockhausen and so on. Even John Cage, and the whole gamut of composers for me has always been such a great influence. And then the jazz is like people like, of course, musicians like John Coltrane, Art Tatum, Oscar Peterson, James Speed Johnson, John Coltrane, of course, again and again and again, because I was lucky enough to be able to open the John Coltrane Quartet when I won the Zurich Jazz Festival in 1965. And also, the Charlie Parkers, and also the musicians, the drummers, the Elvin Jones, and the pianists, also, which I haven't named yet, but MacKay and all these kind of, and Horace Silver and all these pianists. And then the jazz, because, I have to tell something I haven't told you yet, is that in my youth, from early days and until the age of 16 or 17 even, my dad, always forbade me absolutely to listen and to be aware of Elvis Presley and all that kind of rock and roll. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
So of course, when somebody is being ostracized like that and not authorized to do something, of course, the attraction of being able to do it even in secret is multiplied, by 100.
Did you?
So, of course, I listened to Elvis Presley and all the American rock and the birth of all this kind of music and so on, and of course the music by of course the greatest American composers like Gershwin and Aaron Copland and all these people.
Let me again remind everyone, Patrick Moraz is the voice that you're hearing, the legend, and the absolute great pianist, great keyboardist, composer. You know his work from Yes and the Moody Blues and so much more. 3,000 compositions have come out of his mind and out of his hands. Frank MacKay here with the legendary Patrick Moraz. And Patrick, you mentioned getting in trouble with your father about listening to those type of music. Did you really have to listen to him privately? And once you answer that, please, what about when you got into Yes and the Moody Blues? Were your folks or the people that you were supportive of you early on, were they disappointed that you got involved with prog rock bands or rock bands, or were they pleased?
No. Don't take me wrong. Yeah. I mean, it was when I was in my early kind of teens, and so on. I was forbidden to listen to people like not only Elvis, but all these kind of, because my parents, But my my father was a great entertainer himself. He was a great tap dancer, and he even tap danced with Maurice Chevalier, and he worked for Charlie Chaplin when Charlie Chaplin was in Switzerland. And I even the other day I even found some pictures of my dad skiing with Charlie Chaplin. But of course, Charlie Chaplin was a big star. My dad was working for him as a kind of an accompaniment, domestic, and he was. Oh yeah, my dad was actually giving him some lessons to ski, But when the English explosion in the early 60s and mid 60s of course the Beatles, the Stones, and all these acts became the absolute explosion of talent and so on, and of course in America as well, like all these bands, then the whole thing changed because the people who knew I was into music realized that I actually should go first to England as opposed to start doing a musical career in France or even in Switzerland, And that my aim has always been to be with the movement, the British music movement and the American music movement. Because for us in Switzerland and in continental Europe, at that time, there was two complete currents of interest in the music, in the new music, and so on, and the rock, the new rock, the Beatles, and so on, and more. I mean, I can name hundreds of groups as well. But that was coming from England, and then the jazz, the modern jazz, and so on. We're talking about also like Bill Evans and Jill Evans, and all these people, all these wonderful players and innovators were coming from the United States. So that was a completely different current, and we were absolutely interested. I mean, I used to go already since age 11, 12, 13 to all the possible jazz and some rock acts, yes, but more jazz than rock before emigrating to England, which when I was in England and I came back, of course they threw me out, but I came back by the window. And it happened to me 3 times, man, And anyway, so I had my Cambridge proficiency, and I was more able then to become acquainted with England and also United States because at that time, I mean, as we all know, we all always need money to work and so on. And I was lucky enough to be engaged at the age of 21 by Encyclopedia Britannica in Geneva, Switzerland, and I became after 3 months of selling and the first training with them, I became their first the man of the month for 2 months in a row worldwide.
What selling encyclopedias?
Selling, yeah.
Oh my God!
All that Encyclopedia Britannica.
Wow.
After 3 months training and selling, I managed to sell, the 24 volumes plus the 2 extra volumes for the Geographic and so on at the time. Of course, it was like that. It was not on the internet like it is now. Wow. But I was able to sell for 2 months in a row 64 sets in a month.
Wow. Oh, it's listen. Hey, so, compared to making $2.88
and 28 sets of Britannica in 2 months, I was beating all the guys in Iceland, because in Iceland, of course, there was nothing to do except reading Britannica, and the salesmen in Iceland were better than anybody else in the world. But I beat them then, at the time. That was in 1965, man,
Wow. Well, listen, it beats making £2.88 or whatever, $2.88 or whatever you're making as the old pair cook. Hey, let me again remind everyone that we have a couple moments left with Patrick Moraz from Yes and the Moody Blues and so much more. Let's talk about your Yes years and your Moody Blues years. How do you look back upon them? Frank MacKay here with Patrick Moraz.
These were most certainly some of the most extraordinary years as in the rock and roll, in the true big time rock and roll rock. So at the time it was not even called prog rock; it was called just rock and classic rock and so on. But don't forget that I was also very lucky to be able to be forming that band called Refugee with the fantastic drummer Brian Davison and the bass player, unique bass player Lee Jackson, who was fantastic. Guys, we had a fantastic, solid friendship and everything. And that's when, of course, I had known them in 1969. Then in 1970, Keith Emerson left that group called The Nice with them to form ELP with Greg Lake and Carl Palmer. Carl Palmer, whom I knew already then because I had met him several times in Switzerland when he was with Atomic Rooster, And anyway, to cut the story short, I came back from Japan and I wrote the score for a movie called The Invitation in 1973, which won the Grand Prix du Jury, the great prize of the jury. It was not the Oscar; it's the Grand Prix du Jury is the next big prize, But that movie, The Invitation, won, and I did the whole score with half of the symphony orchestra and so on. I conducted the orchestra and I played and so on. I had a friend helping me to do the orchestration, a fantastic organist, classical organist. We used to organize improvisation festivals of music on classical organ and so on in Switzerland and everywhere. And his name is Guy Bovet. He's very, very famous organist still now all over the world. And anyway, cut the story short, after the day after finishing the invitation and knowing that that film had won the Cannes Festival, Grand Prix du Jury, I was receiving a call from a guy I had known in 1969. That was Lee Jackson. And he said, "Hey, mate, do you remember me? Why don't you get your ass over here? We want to play with you, and maybe we'll form a band if we like each other, And we never found really the name Refugee until about 4 months after we started. When I arrived in England, I didn't have an apartment, I didn't have a car, I didn't have transport. I was living on the floor of the kitchen of Lee Jackson's house in Bayswater, and every day we used to go and walk at least 6 miles in and 6 miles out to go to rehearse under a pub in Bayswater, where we used to have to be able to have 8 hours rehearsals every day. And that's all we did for 4 months, together. And that's how Refugee was born. I wrote the music on the spot there, but it was kind of complex for this group. Mind you, they were fantastic guys. They were fantastic musicians, super troopers. And don't forget, they had been big stars already in Europe until the end of the 60s with the Nice, with Keith Emerson.
Yeah. Wow.
So there was some reminiscences. I understand that at some point, even the record company, which was going to represent the Nice in the States, wanted us to be called the Nice 2 or something, and I was reluctant to that. And then the name Refugee was found during a brainstorm in a pub next to Charisma Records, which had by that time signed the band. And as you know, Charisma Records was also the label for Genesis and for Lindenspan, Hawkwind, and for, of course, those famous 5 guys, with John Cleese and so on. So Charisma label was an extraordinary little label. They were doing very, very good. And then, of course, Genesis split and Peter Gabriel went on his way. Then Phil Collins became who we became. Fantastic group, absolutely original. And we had the best of relationship. And I was very happy with the band. And we did this eponymous album called Refugee. And then things started to degenerate a little bit because we thought that the album was great. We should have been touring much more to promote the album and to do this and that and that and that. And then one day, I did another movie during a break. I go back to France and Switzerland. I did a movie with Gérard Depardieu, who was the biggest star, the biggest movie star in France. And I was asked to do the score and conduct the orchestra for that movie called Pas si méchant que ça. Not as bad as that. Not as crazy as that.
Yeah.
Very good little movie, is Swiss and so on. And then when I did the last filming session, I was recording with the symphony orchestra live and conducting the orchestra. The next day I was back to London, and then the phone rings, and it's Brian Lane, who was the current manager of Yes at the time. who's on the phone, and he said, "Hey, Patrick Moraz, well, my name is Brian Lane, and I'm the manager of Yes. Would you like to come and see a rehearsal of the band?" I said, "What do you mean to see a rehearsal? I know what they're looking for a keyboard player. They haven't found one yet. You want me to audition for them, don't you?"
Patrick Moraz has been our very special guest and a legend. Absolute legend on keyboard and piano and composing. Over 3,000 compositions. You know his work from Yes and the Moody Blues. Frank MacKay here, thrilled and mesmerized to talk to Patrick Moraz, the one and only Patrick Moraz. And we want to thank all of you on behalf of me and Patrick Moraz from Yes and the Moody Blues. I'd love to thank all of you for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Breaking It Down.